Some men carry their past in their scars, others in the way they move their hands. The January wind cuts through Rikers Island like a blade, whistling between the razor wire and concrete walls where 8,000 souls wait for justice or judgment. In cell block D, a graying man sits on his bunk, methodically rapping his knuckles with torn bedsheet, a ritual so deeply ingrained he doesn't realize he's doing it. The other inmates see only Michael Thompson, a quiet janitor who keeps his head down and speaks to no one. But muscle memory doesn't forget, and neither do fists that once moved faster than human eyes could follow. When Razor Martinez decides the new fish needs a lesson in prison hierarchy, he has no idea he's about to step into a ring with ghosts of Madison Square Garden. What happens in the next 90 seconds will force everyone, guards, inmates, and the watching world, to question everything they think they know about age, power, and the thin line between civilization and primal fury. Can a man truly bury his nature, or does it simply wait beneath the surface, coiled like a sleeping serpent? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The torn fabric wraps around weathered knuckles with practiced precision, each loop methodical, purposeful. Michael Thompson, the name feels foreign even after 3 weeks of wearing it like an ill-fitting uniform, tightens the makeshift wrapping and flexes his fingers. The muscle memory burns through him like electricity. 40 years of conditioning refusing to fade despite his desperate attempts to bury it. The cell walls press close, painted institutional green over decades of despair. His cellmate Carlos, a wiry kid from the Bronx doing 18 months for armed robbery, watches nervously from the corner bunk. Carlos has been giving him space since day one, something about the way the old man moves that triggers an instinct older than language, the recognition of a predator, even one trying to play house cat. "You okay, old-timer?" Carlos ventures, his voice barely above a whisper. Mike stops rapping, stares at his hands. They're scarred, the knuckles enlarged from decades of impact, but they still remember. God help him, they still remember everything. "Just thinking," he murmurs, his voice carrying the weight of a Brooklyn childhood buried under years of fame, disgrace, and now this, rock bottom with a shovel in hand, still digging. The commissary bell echoes through D block, a metallic clang that sends 200 men shuffling toward whatever passes for sustenance in this concrete purgatory. Mike unwraps his hands slowly, hiding the evidence of his ritual in the thin mattress. He's learned the routines, the unspoken rules, the delicate ecosystem of violence that keeps this place from exploding into complete chaos. The corridor stretches ahead like a gauntlet, fluorescent lights flickering overhead with the persistence of a dying heartbeat. Conversations halt as he passes, not from respect, but from the careful calculation of men who've learned to read danger in the smallest gestures. They see an aging janitor with graying temples and careful eyes. They don't see the man who once stood in rings before screaming crowds, who moved like liquid lightning and hit like a freight train loaded with dynamite. 3 weeks ago, Mike Tyson was a ghost story, a legend whose prime existed in grainy YouTube videos and fading newspaper clippings. Now he's Michael Thompson, prisoner number 47,823, mopping floors and emptying trash cans while his lawyer, the only person who knows his real identity, works frantically to prove his innocence in a murder case built on circumstantial evidence and convenient timing. The framing had been surgical, professional. Someone wanted Mike Tyson gone, not just defeated but obliterated, and they'd used his own past against him. The dead man in the alley behind the Brooklyn gym where Mike had been training inner-city kids, off the books trying to give back without the media circus, had defensive wounds on his hands, the kind that suggested a fighter, the kind that pointed directly at the most famous fighter in the neighborhood, especially when that fighter had been seen leaving the gym 20 minutes before the estimated time of death. In the commissary line, Mike keeps his head down, shoulders slightly hunched in the universal posture of institutional invisibility. The guards see what they expect, another broken-down convict counting days until parole. But Co. Williams, working the serving line, catches something in the way Thompson carries himself, a fluidity that doesn't match his age, a coiled readiness that seems almost feline. "Thompson," Williams calls out, ladling mystery meat onto a plastic tray. "You got any boxing experience? Rec department's looking for someone to help with the program." The question hangs in the air like smoke. Around him, conversations continue, but Mike feels the subtle shift of attention. In prison, information is currency, and everyone's always listening for something they can trade, use, or weaponize. Little bit, Mike answers. The understatement of several lifetimes. Long time ago. He takes his tray and moves toward the tables, scanning for an empty spot where he can eat in peace. But peace, he's learning, is a luxury that doesn't exist in this place. Every meal is a negotiation. Every interaction a potential spark in a powder keg of testosterone and frustrated rage. At a corner table, he settles into the plastic chair and forces himself to eat mechanically. The food tastes like cardboard seasoned with institutional despair, but he needs the calories. In here, weakness is a death sentence, and at 58, he can't afford to let his body deteriorate any further. From across the room, he feels eyes on him, studying, measuring. He doesn't look up, but his peripheral vision catalogs threats with the automatic efficiency of a man who survived in rings where split-second awareness meant the difference between victory and unconsciousness. The predators are circling. He can feel it in the air, the way animals sense an earthquake before the first tremor. Someone's made a decision about him, marked him for something that will test whether Michael Thompson's disguise can survive contact with the kind of violence that built Mike Tyson's legend. His hands rest on the table, steady and still. But beneath the surface, something ancient stirs. The eyes belong to Razor Martinez, though Mike doesn't know the name yet. He can feel the weight of that predatory gaze like a physical thing, pressing against the back of his neck as he chews the flavorless protein on his tray. The man sits 3 tables over, surrounded by his crew. 4 men who radiate the casual violence of career criminals. Razor's reputation precedes him through the whispered conversations that flow like currency through D-Block. 18 years inside, 3 attempted murder charges that didn't stick, and a network of fear that extends from the kitchen workers to the guards who've learned to look the other way when convenient. Mike finishes his meal in silence, the taste of institutional despair coating his tongue. Around him, the commissary buzzes with the careful choreography of men navigating invisible territorial lines. New fish learn quickly or bleed slowly. Those are the only options in this concrete ecosystem, where Michael Thompson is still being evaluated, categorized, assigned his place in the hierarchy. The walk back to D-Block takes him past the recreation yard, where January wind cuts through the chain-link fence like frozen razors. Through the reinforced windows, he watches a group of inmates playing basketball, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The sight triggers something deep in his chest, a longing for movement, for the simple joy of physical expression without calculation or consequence. In his past life, exercise had been worship, training a sacred ritual that connected him to something larger than himself. Now every push-up, every shadow box in his cell, carries the risk of exposure. Michael Thompson should be soft, broken down by decades of whatever story the Department of Corrections has in his fabricated file. He can't afford to let muscle memory betray the careful fiction that keeps him alive. His cell provides temporary sanctuary, though the word is relative in a place where privacy is an illusion and safety is a bet you make new every morning. Carlos looks up from a tattered paperback. Stephen King, something about redemption and the long walk toward it. The kid's been inside 8 months, long enough to develop the hyper-vigilant awareness that comes with surviving in a place designed to break men down to their component parts. "You made an impression at lunch," Carlos says, not looking up from his book. Razor's been asking questions. Mike settles onto his bunk, the thin mattress protesting under his weight. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that usually end with someone getting carried out on a stretcher." Carlos finally meets his eyes. "Word is you carry yourself like you know how to handle business. That makes you either an asset or a threat, and Razor don't like uncertainty." The information hangs between them like cigarette smoke. In the world Mike left behind, problems were solved with contracts and lawyers, with careful negotiations conducted in boardrooms and media statements. Here, disputes are settled with sharpened toothbrushes, and the kind of sudden violence that erupts without warning or witnesses. Through the cell bars, he watches the afternoon shift change. The guards move with practiced boredom, checking boxes on clipboards, maintaining the illusion of order over barely contained chaos. Cole Williams passes by, slowing slightly as he reaches their cell. His eyes find Mike through the bars, curious, calculating. "Thompson," he calls out. "Rec duty starts Monday. Hope you remember more about boxing than you let on." After Williams moves on, Carlos shakes his head. "Rec duty puts you in contact with the whole population, every psychopath with a grudge and time to kill." He closes his book, marking his place with a torn piece of newspaper. "You sure you want that kind of visibility?" Mike stares at the ceiling, counting the water stains that map across the concrete like continents of despair. Each mark tells a story of institutional decay, of a system that warehouses men without hope of transformation. Not much choice. Saying no makes me look weak, and weak doesn't last long in here. The afternoon stretches ahead with the weight of eternity. He's learned the rhythm: count, meals, yard time if the weather permits, then the long descent into evening lockdown when 200 men are caged with their thoughts in the kind of darkness that breeds in confined spaces. His lawyer's last visit plays on repeat in his mind. The case is circumstantial but strong, built on a foundation of Mike's own reputation, and the careful placement of evidence that points toward a man with both motive and means. Someone had studied his patterns, learned his habits, waited for the perfect moment to spring a trap that would remove Mike Tyson from the world permanently. But they'd underestimated the man they were trying to bury. Behind the manufactured identity of Michael Thompson lies not just the former heavyweight champion, but something more dangerous, a survivor who's learned to adapt, to find advantage in the most disadvantageous circumstances. As evening count begins, Mike closes his eyes and lets his breathing slow. The sounds of D-block, shouted conversations, rattling doors, the constant background hum of barely controlled chaos fade into white noise. Tomorrow brings rec duty and increased exposure. It brings Razor Martinez and whatever test the Predators have designed for the quiet newcomer who carries himself like he's forgotten to be afraid. His hands rest at his sides, still and patient, while beneath the surface, something ancient waits. Morning arrives like a slap of cold concrete against consciousness. Mike's eyes open to the sound of keys rattling down the corridor. The morning shift beginning their ritual of counts and corrections. Carlos is already awake, sitting on the edge of his bunk with the tense alertness of someone who's learned that sleep is a luxury that can get you killed. "Big day," Carlos murmurs, not quite meeting Mike's eyes. "Word travels fast in here. Everyone knows about your rec assignment." Mike swings his legs over the side of his bunk, feeling the familiar ache in joints that have absorbed decades of punishment. The morning routine is mechanical. Wash with the thin bar of soap that smells like disinfectant and broken promises. Brush teeth with a toothbrush that wouldn't clean a child's smile properly. Dress in the same gray uniform that erases individual identity one thread at a time. But today feels different. There's an electricity in the air, the kind of anticipation that builds before a storm breaks. Conversations down the corridor carry a different quality, sharper, more focused. Mike's learned to read these subtle shifts, the way predators communicate through glances and silence. The call comes at 0800 hours. "Thompson, report to rec supervision." Mike moves through the corridors with measured steps, passing cells where men study him with the calculating interest of gamblers sizing up a horse before placing their bets. Some nod respectfully, the automatic deference shown to anyone willing to step into an arena where violence is both sport and survival. Others watch with predatory hunger, already planning how to exploit whatever weakness the day might reveal. The recreation supervisor is a thick-set man named Patterson, who carries himself with the weathered confidence of someone who's seen every kind of institutional drama play out over 2 decades. His office overlooks the main gymnasium, where morning light filters through reinforced windows to illuminate a space that serves as both sanctuary and battlefield. "Thompson," Patterson says, not looking up from his paperwork. "Says here you got some boxing experience." "Some," Mike replies, maintaining the careful balance between honesty and self-preservation that has become his default mode. "Good, because what we got here is a situation." Patterson finally raises his eyes and Mike sees something there, a wariness that suggests this conversation is about more than recreational programming. Razor Martinez has been pushing to expand Fight Night, unofficial off the books, but with my unofficial blessing, keeps the temperature down. gives the animals a way to settle disputes without shivs in the shower. Mike feels something shift in his chest, a recognition of familiar territory. The sweet science of controlled violence, the ancient dance of aggression channeled through rules and referee oversight. But here, in this concrete coliseum, the rules would be different. Darker. He's been asking about you specifically, Patterson continues. Seems to think you might be worth testing. The words hang in the air like gun smoke. Mike understands now, this isn't about recreation or rehabilitation. This is about Razor's need to establish dominance over the unknown quantity that Michael Thompson represents. In the ecosystem of prison politics, uncertainty is cancer. It spreads, creates doubt, undermines the careful hierarchies that keep chaos from consuming everything. And if I refuse? Mike asks, though he already knows the answer. Patterson's smile carries no warmth. Refusing ain't really an option, not if you want to survive your stay here. Razor's got reach that extends into every corner of this place. Kitchen workers who might forget to save you a meal, guards who might be slow to respond when trouble finds you, trustees who handle cell assignments and work details. Through the office window, Mike can see inmates beginning to filter into the gymnasium. Some head for the weight pile, others claim space for calisthenics or stretching routines. But there's an undercurrent of anticipation. Men positioning themselves for optimal viewing angles while maintaining the pretense of normal activity. Tonight, Patterson says, sliding a clipboard across his desk, after evening count, during the gap between shifts. Gymnasium. Razor wants to see what you're made of. Mike stares at the clipboard, a work assignment form that would place him in the gym during the critical window, when official oversight would be minimal. His signature on that document would be more than administrative compliance. It would be acceptance of a challenge that could expose everything he's worked to conceal. But refusal would mark him as prey, someone to be hunted and broken down piece by piece until the predators had satisfied their need for entertainment. He thinks of his lawyer's last visit, the promise that new evidence might surface within weeks. Survival until then requires walking a razor's edge between visibility and vulnerability. His hand moves to the pen, hesitates. In this moment, Michael Thompson could still choose anonymity, could find ways to avoid the confrontation that waits in the shadows. But Mike Tyson, the part of him that never learned to back down, that built an identity on meeting challenges head-on, recognizes the familiar weight of destiny. The pen touches paper. His signature flows across the document in careful block letters, Michael Thompson. Smart choice, Patterson says, but his expression suggests he's not entirely sure whether he's just witnessed wisdom or suicide. As Mike turns to leave, he catches sight of Razor Martinez entering the gymnasium, moving with the confident swagger of an apex predator surveying his territory. The die is cast. Mike's feet carry him away from Patterson's office on autopilot, while his mind reels with the magnitude of what he's just committed to. The clipboard remains in Patterson's possession, but the weight of his signature feels like shackles around his wrists. In agreeing to meet Razor tonight, he's potentially signed his own death warrant, not from physical destruction, though that remains a possibility, but from the exposure that combat brings. The corridor seems longer on the return journey, each step echoing with the hollow sound of approaching doom. Other inmates move past him with knowing glances, their expressions carrying the morbid curiosity of men about to witness either an execution or a revelation. Word travels faster than wildfire in this concrete ecosystem, and by now everyone knows that the quiet newcomer has accepted Razor's invitation to dance. Back in his cell, Carlos looks up from his book with the expression of someone watching a friend board a sinking ship. You signed it, didn't you? Mike settles onto his bunk, suddenly feeling every one of his 58 years. The adrenaline that carried him through the meeting with Patterson is fading, replaced by something far more dangerous, doubt. Didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Carlos replies, though his tone suggests he doesn't believe it either. Question is whether you can live with the consequences. The afternoon stretches ahead like a death march. Mike attempts to follow his normal routine, reading, push-ups, the careful maintenance of Michael Thompson's unremarkable persona, but every action feels hollow, performed for an audience that no longer exists. Tonight will strip away pretense, force him into a spotlight that reveals truth whether he wants it exposed or not. His hands tremble slightly as he turns pages in a magazine he's not actually reading. These same hands once moved with the precision of surgical instruments, delivering combinations that could end fights in seconds. But that was decades ago, when his reflexes were sharper, his body younger, his mind unclouded by the weight of secrets. Now they belong to an aging janitor who shouldn't possess the muscle memory of a champion. The real terror isn't physical pain. He's absorbed enough punishment to understand his body's capacity for endurance. The terror is exposure, the moment when careful camouflage falls away and Michael Thompson reveals himself to be something impossible. Security cameras record everything in this place, and footage of movement patterns that shouldn't exist could reach the wrong eyes, trigger investigations that unravel his lawyer's careful work. "You're thinking too much," Carlos observes, not looking up from his book. "Whatever happens tonight, happens. Worrying about it just wastes energy you might need later." But Mike can't stop the spiral of doubt. What if his body betrays him, moving with the fluid precision that made him legendary? What if muscle memory overrides conscious control in the heat of combat? Worse, what if age and time have stripped away his abilities entirely, leaving him defenseless against a younger, hungrier predator? The lunch bell provides temporary distraction, but even the commissary feels different now. Conversations halt as he passes, replaced by the kind of charged silence that precedes lightning strikes. Men study him with calculating eyes, making private wagers on his survival prospects. Some look sympathetic, older inmates who remember their own initiations into the brutal hierarchy of institutional violence. Others watch with predatory anticipation, already planning how to claim whatever territory his defeat might create. Razor Martinez sits at his usual table, surrounded by his crew, projecting the casual confidence of a man who's never doubted his own dominance. He doesn't acknowledge Mike directly, but his presence fills the room like poison gas. This is his kingdom, his rules, his decision about whether Michael Thompson lives or dies. The afternoon yard time offers no relief. January wind cuts through his clothing like frozen knives while he walks the perimeter, trying to clear his head. Other inmates give him space now, the respectful distance afforded to gladiators before they enter the arena. Some nod encouragingly, others avoid eye contact entirely, not wanting to associate with someone who might be dead by morning. Evening count arrives with the inevitability of sunset. Mike lies on his bunk, staring at water stains on the ceiling that map his fears across cracked concrete. Each announcement from the guards, evening meal, medication call, final count, brings him closer to a reckoning he's not sure he can survive intact. "Whatever you are," Carlos says quietly as lights begin to dim throughout D-Block, "whatever you were before this place, tonight it comes out. Might as well stop fighting it." The words hit like physical blows. For weeks, Mike has constructed an elaborate fiction, buried his true identity so deep that sometimes he almost believes in Michael Thompson's existence. But combat strips away pretense, reveals truth in the most primitive ways possible. Tonight we'll answer questions he's been afraid to ask. Is he still the man who once dominated heavyweight boxing, or just an aging ghost clinging to faded glory? The corridor grows quiet as evening shift change approaches. Soon the guards will complete their rotation, leaving brief windows of unofficial time when institutional oversight becomes deliberately blind. Mike closes his eyes and tries to pray, but the only words that come are fighters' mantras from decades past. His hands rest at his sides, steady now, waiting. The reckoning approaches. The sound of keys fading down the corridor marks the moment of no return. Mike's eyes open in the dimness of evening lockdown, his body responding to an internal clock that has counted down to this inevitable hour. The institutional noises of D-Block, coughing, whispered conversations, the occasional clang of metal against concrete, create a symphony of barely contained chaos that has become his lullaby over these past weeks. But tonight, that chaos calls to him. Carlos pretends to sleep on the opposite bunk, but Mike can sense the tension radiating from his cellmate's still form. Everyone knows what's coming. The unspoken word has traveled through the invisible networks that connect predator to prey, spectator to participant. In 43 minutes, when the evening shift settles into their routines and the cameras in the gymnasium develop their predictable blind spots, Michael Thompson will either emerge as someone worthy of respect or be carried out as a cautionary tale. Mike sits up slowly, testing his body's responses. His joints protest with the familiar ache of accumulated punishment. But beneath the surface, something darker stirs. Muscle memory doesn't age the way flesh does. It waits, patient as a coiled serpent, ready to strike when survival demands it. His hands flex involuntarily, fingers testing the familiar choreography of combinations that once terrorized heavyweight divisions. The realization hits him like cold water. He wants this. Somewhere beneath the careful construction of Michael Thompson's harmless persona, beneath weeks of institutional routine and manufactured invisibility, the fighter remains. Not just the mechanics of boxing, the footwork, the defensive patterns, the precise angles that create openings, but something more primal, the part of him that never learned to submit, that translated childhood trauma into controlled violence, that built an identity on the willingness to destroy or be destroyed. "Time to go," Carlos whispers without moving. Guard rotation happens in 3 minutes. Mike stands, testing his balance in the confined space. The concrete floor feels solid beneath his feet, providing the kind of stable platform that good footwork requires. He moves through a brief warm-up routine, shoulder rolls, neck rotations, the subtle preparations that prepare flesh for combat, and notices how naturally his body responds. Decades may have passed, but the programming remains intact. The corridor beckons like a birth canal. Stepping through their cell door won't just be movement through space, it will be the conscious abandonment of everything he's tried to become since entering this place. Michael Thompson, the aging janitor with downcast eyes and careful anonymity, will die tonight. What emerges from the gymnasium will be something else entirely, either a ghost of former greatness or a broken reminder of mortality's inevitable triumph. "Carlos," he says quietly, not turning around. "Yeah? If things go bad tonight, if questions get asked, you never saw anything unusual, never noticed anything that didn't fit." Carlos shifts on his bunk, the sound of fabric against concrete marking his acknowledgement. "Never noticed what?" "You've been invisible since you got here, Thompson. Just another gray ghost serving time. The lie feels like benediction. Whatever happens in the next hour, Carlos will maintain the fiction that protects them both. But Mike knows the truth. Invisibility ends tonight. One way or another, people will notice Michael Thompson after this." He moves to the cell door, hands wrapping around the cold metal bars. Down the corridor, shadows shift as other inmates position themselves for optimal viewing angles. The gymnasium waits like a Roman Colosseum, ready to witness either triumph or destruction. Razor Martinez will already be there, surrounded by his crew, confident in his ability to break whatever resistance this aging newcomer might offer. But Razor has never faced Mike Tyson. Not the celebrity, not the scandal-ridden figure from tabloid headlines, but the pure distillation of violence that built an empire on the willingness to hurt and be hurt. That man learned to fight in environments far more hostile than Rikers Island, learned that survival sometimes requires embracing the very darkness others run from. The guard's footsteps fade toward the far end of D block. It's time. Mike steps into the corridor, leaving behind weeks of careful performance. Each footstep carries him further from the safety of anonymity, closer to a confrontation that will demand everything he's tried to bury. Other inmates watch from their cells like spectators in a medieval execution, some sympathetic, others hungry for whatever violence is about to unfold. The gymnasium doors appear ahead, partially open, spilling dim light across worn linoleum. He can hear voices inside, low, anticipatory murmurs that suggest the audience is already assembled. His pulse remains steady, breathing controlled. The fighter's calm that once carried him through championship bouts settles over his consciousness like familiar armor. There is no Michael Thompson anymore. There is only the man walking toward those doors, carrying decades of accumulated violence in hands that remember their purpose. The threshold waits, beyond which lies either redemption or destruction. He crosses it without hesitation, stepping into the light. The gymnasium transforms into a gladiatorial arena under the harsh fluorescent lights. Approximately 30 inmates line the walls in a rough circle, their faces carrying the hungry anticipation of men starved for entertainment in a world stripped of everything except survival. The basketball hoops have been pulled up, creating an open space roughly 20 feet square, enough room for violence, not enough for escape. Razor Martinez stands at the center like a dark emperor, his crew flanking him in tactical positions that speak to years of orchestrated brutality. He's removed his shirt, revealing a topography of scars and tattoos that tell the story of a life built on inflicting pain. His smile carries the confidence of a predator who has never encountered anything he couldn't break. "Thompson," Razor calls out, his voice echoing off concrete walls. "Almost thought you wasn't gonna show. Would have been disappointed. Been looking forward to this conversation." Mike steps into the circle, noting how the inmates adjust their positions to maintain optimal viewing angles. These men understand the theater of violence, the way dominance displays require proper staging. Security cameras mounted in the corners have been strategically angled away by inmates with maintenance duties, creating blind spots that won't capture whatever unfolds here. Conversation? Mike keeps his voice level, maintaining Michael Thompson's careful demeanor even as his body begins its transition to something far more dangerous. "Yeah, conversation." Razor begins circling, his movement predatory and calculated. "See, you've been here weeks now, keeping quiet, staying invisible. But invisibility makes people nervous, makes them wonder what you're hiding, what kind of secrets you brought with you from the outside." The watching inmates remain silent, but Mike can feel their energy like static electricity. Some have placed bets, commissary items, work assignments, territory rights that will shift depending on how the next few minutes unfold. Others simply hunger for the vicarious release that comes from witnessing another man's destruction. "So this here's a test," Razor continues, his voice carrying the authority of institutional gospel. "You prove you belong, show us what you're made of. Maybe you earn some respect. Maybe people stop wondering if you're soft, if you got protection on the outside that makes you feel untouchable in here." Mike recognizes the choreography. He's seen it in boxing gyms, in underground venues, anywhere men gather to prove themselves through controlled violence. But there's nothing controlled about this. Razor isn't looking for sport. He's looking for dominance, for the kind of psychological submission that comes from breaking another man in front of witnesses. "And if I prove myself?" Mike asks, though he already knows the answer. "Then you get to keep breathing without looking over your shoulder every minute of every day." Razor's smile widens, revealing teeth sharpened to points in a display of calculated menace. "But if you disappoint me, if you turn out to be just another soft civilian playing tough guy games," the threat hangs unfinished, more effective for what it doesn't say. Mike's eyes scan the crowd, cataloging faces, identifying potential allies and definite enemies. Most watch with neutral anticipation, but a few older inmates, men who remember their own initiations into this brutal ecosystem, look sympathetic. Carlos stands near the far wall, his face carefully blank. "Rules are simple," Razor announces to the assembled crowd as much as to Mike. "No weapons, no crew involvement, just two men having an honest discussion about respect and territory. Fight ends when someone can't continue or chooses to submit." Mike nods, understanding that acceptance seals whatever fate awaits him. He begins removing his shirt, revealing a physique that draws murmurs from the watching inmates. Despite his age, decades of training have left their mark. Muscle definition that speaks to serious athletic background, scar tissue that suggests familiarity with violence. Several spectators exchange glances, recalculating their assumptions about the quiet newcomer. Razor notices the shift in crowd energy, his confidence flickering momentarily. "You've been holding out on us, Thompson. That's not the body of a janitor." "Used to box," Mike replies, maintaining the careful balance between truth and concealment. "Long time ago." "Boxing." Razor spits the word like profanity. "Rich man's sport, all rules and referees and safety equipment. This ain't boxing, old man. This is real talk." But even as he speaks, Razor's posture changes, becoming more cautious. The predatory confidence remains, but it's tempered now by recognition that his prey might possess unexpected defenses. He begins moving in tighter circles, looking for openings, testing Mike's reactions to feints and aggressive gestures. Mike feels the familiar calm settling over his consciousness, the fighter's zone where time slows and peripheral vision expands to encompass every potential threat. His stance shifts almost imperceptibly, weight distributing across the balls of his feet in patterns burned into muscle memory through 10,000 hours of training. The crowd senses the change in atmospheric pressure. Conversations die, replaced by the kind of charged silence that precedes lightning strikes. Razor lunges forward without warning, his attack brutal and direct, the opening move in a conversation that will be conducted entirely in the language of violence. Time fractures into microseconds as Razor's charge unfolds with the brutal efficiency of institutional violence. Mike's body responds before his conscious mind can intervene, muscle memory overriding Michael Thompson's carefully constructed facade like water breaking through a cracked dam. The slip comes automatically, a subtle shift of weight that transforms Razor's powerful lunge into empty air and momentum. Mike's left shoulder dips, his torso rotating with the fluid precision of a machine designed for exactly this purpose. The movement is so natural, so economical, that several inmates gasp at the impossible grace displayed by a man who should be scrambling desperately for survival. Razor's fist whistles past Mike's jaw, close enough to feel the displaced air, far enough to reveal the vast chasm between amateur brutality and professional excellence. The miss throws Razor off balance, his forward momentum carrying him into Mike's range where distance and timing become weapons more dangerous than any sharpened metal. But Mike doesn't counter. Not yet. Instead, he circles left, maintaining the careful facade even as his body betrays decades of championship-to-level training. His footwork creates angles that shouldn't exist in a gymnasium brawl, positioning that speaks to an understanding of combat geometry that transcends simple street fighting. Lucky, Razor snarls, recovering his balance with the quick reflexes of a natural athlete. But his eyes narrow, recalculating the threat assessment that should have been simple. The quiet janitor moves like water, flows like someone who learned to fight in places where second chances don't exist. The watching inmates sense the shift in dynamics. What began as anticipated slaughter now carries the electric uncertainty of genuine competition. Men who placed bets on a quick finish exchange nervous glances, recognizing patterns their conscious minds can't quite identify but their primitive instincts understand perfectly. Razor attacks again, this time with more calculation. His combinations are wild but dangerous, the kind of haymaker sequences that have broken jaws and ended careers in correctional facilities across the state. Each punch carries genuine malice, intended to cause maximum damage rather than score points or display technique. Mike weaves through the assault like smoke, his defensive patterns so ingrained they operate independently of conscious thought. Duck, slip, pivot, create space. The fundamental algorithms of survival that transformed a troubled kid from Brownsville into the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history. His head movement makes Razor's fists seem slow, predictable, almost choreographed in their brutality. The gymnasium fills with the sound of leather against air as punch after punch finds nothing but space where Mike's head should be. Razor's breathing becomes labored, his combinations losing snap and precision as frustration mounts. The psychological dynamic shifts imperceptibly, predator becoming prey without either man fully understanding the transition. Stand still and fight, Razor demands between ragged breaths, sweat beginning to bead on his scarred chest. Stop running like a coward. But Mike isn't running. He's doing something far more dangerous. He's studying. Each defensive sequence provides information about Razor's timing, his preferred combinations, the subtle telegraphs that precede his most powerful shots. The data accumulates like ammunition, waiting for the moment when Michael Thompson's careful invisibility finally shatters. Carlos watches from the wall, his face a mask of carefully controlled tension. He recognizes what others miss, the way Mike's defensive work carries hints of professional training that shouldn't exist. A janitor might know how to throw a punch, might even have amateur boxing experience. But this level of defensive sophistication suggests something far more dangerous. The crowd's energy shifts again as minutes pass without blood. They came for destruction, for the vicarious release that comes from witnessing another man's breaking point. Instead, they're seeing something that defies their understanding of how these encounters should unfold. The aging newcomer moves with an authority that makes Razor's considerable skills appear amateurish. Mike feels the familiar calculation taking over, the fighter's mind that reduces human opponents to collections of patterns and weaknesses. Razor telegraphs his right hand by dropping his left shoulder. His combinations always follow the same sequence: jab, right cross, left hook. He loads up on his power shots, leaving himself exposed to counters that could end the fight in seconds. But ending it means revealing everything. A knockout punch would raise questions that Michael Thompson can't answer, generate footage that might reach investigative eyes capable of recognizing impossible movement patterns. The delicate balance between survival and exposure narrows to a razor's edge. Razor lunges forward again, desperation creeping into his technique. His reputation depends on dominating this encounter, proving to 30 witnesses that his authority remains absolute. But each missed combination erodes that authority, reveals cracks in the facade of invincibility that keeps him alive in this concrete ecosystem. Mike's hands remain low, seemingly defensive, but the watching inmates begin to notice something that makes their blood run cold. Despite the apparent passivity, despite the appearance of merely surviving, Michael Thompson controls every aspect of this fight. He dictates distance, timing, positioning. Razor swings wildly at shadows, while Mike dances through violence like a ghost walking through walls. The moment of truth approaches with the inevitability of dawn. The gymnasium air grows thick with sweat and anticipation, as Razor's desperation transforms into something feral. His movements become increasingly erratic, the calculated brutality of a seasoned enforcer dissolving into the wild flailing of a man watching his reputation die in real time. Each missed combination chips away at the foundation of fear that has kept him alive in this concrete hell, and the watching inmates smell weakness like sharks scenting blood in dark water. Mike recognizes the shift, knows from 1,000 sparring sessions and championship fights that this is when opponents become most dangerous, when skill abandons them and only raw violence remains. A cornered animal fights differently than a confident predator, trades precision for fury, calculation for chaos. But chaos, properly managed, creates opportunities that careful fighters can exploit. "You're making me look bad, old man." Razor pants between combinations, his chest heaving with exertion that shouldn't exist after only minutes of work. That ends now. He lunges forward with everything he has, abandoning defensive responsibility in favor of overwhelming aggression. His right hand loads up like a sledgehammer, telegraphed so obviously that Mike could avoid it blindfolded. But avoidance isn't enough anymore, not with 30 pairs of eyes cataloging every movement. Not with whispers already beginning in the back ranks about the janitor who fights like something else entirely. Mike's greatest fear crystallizes in that frozen moment before impact. Not physical harm, but exposure. Not the pain of Razor's fists, but the recognition that would follow any display of his true capabilities. For weeks, he's built Michael Thompson from careful observations and practiced anonymity, created a ghost that could haunt these corridors without drawing attention from the outside world. One mistake, one moment of authentic response, and everything crumbles. But Razor's haymaker carries enough force to shatter bone, and survival instinct overrides careful calculation. Mike's counter unfolds with the devastating precision of muscle memory that spans 4 decades. A short left hook that travels perhaps 6 inches, but contains the accumulated knowledge of a man who once held the heavyweight championship of the world. The punch lands with surgical accuracy, finding the sweet spot behind Razor's ear where consciousness meets unconsciousness. The sound echoes through the gymnasium like a gunshot, sharp and final, followed by the heavy thud of Razor's body hitting concrete with the finality of a closing book. Absolute silence descends over the assembled inmates, broken only by the harsh fluorescent lights humming overhead and the distant sounds of institutional life beyond these walls. 30 men stare at the impossible tableau. Razor Martinez, the most feared enforcer in D-Block, unconscious on the floor, while Michael Thompson stands over him with his hands still raised in a fighter's stance that speaks to training no janitor should possess. Carlos pushes off from the wall, his movement breaking the spell that holds the crowd frozen. "Fight's over," he announces with careful authority. Razor took a shot, caught a counter, happens in every scrap. But even as he speaks, Mike can see the questions forming in watching eyes. The way he moved, the precision of that final punch, the defensive work that made a dangerous man look amateurish. Details accumulate like evidence, threatening to pierce the veil of anonymity that has protected him since entering this place. "Jesus Christ," someone whispers from the back of the crowd. "You see how fast that was?" "Thompson ain't no janitor," another voice adds. "That's professional work." Mike lowers his hands, forcing his body language back into Michael Thompson's careful posture of apologetic submission. But the damage is done. Performance shattered by necessity. Cover blown by the simple requirement of not allowing his skull to be caved in by a man fighting for his institutional life. "Got lucky," he says to the crowd, his voice carrying Thompson's diffident tone even as his eyes scan for immediate threats. "Caught him coming in." The lie feels inadequate against the evidence of what they've witnessed, but several inmates nod as if accepting the fiction. They need explanations that fit their understanding of how the world works, need to believe that prison hierarchies don't shift this dramatically without warning signs they should have recognized. Razor stirs on the concrete, consciousness returning slowly. When he finally sits up, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes carry the hollow look of a man who has seen his own mortality reflected in another man's fists. He knows what happened, understands that the aging newcomer could have killed him with minimal effort, chose restraint over annihilation for reasons that have nothing to do with mercy. "We're done here," Razor announces to the crowd, his voice carrying forced authority. Thompson proved himself. Conversation's finished. But as the inmates begin dispersing, returning to their cells before the guard rotation discovers the illegal gathering, Mike knows the real conversation is just beginning. Questions will be asked. Stories will be told and retold, details examined and expanded with each telling. The ghost of Michael Thompson has acquired substance, cast shadows that observant eyes will notice. In trying to remain invisible, he has become the most watched man in D-Block. The ordeal of maintaining his cover has only just begun. The 48 hours following the gymnasium incident unfold like a slow-motion catastrophe, each moment bringing fresh confirmation that Mike's carefully constructed anonymity lies in ruins. The whispers begin immediately, hushed conversations that die when he approaches, speculative glances that follow him through the corridors, the electric buzz of men trying to solve a puzzle that could get them all killed if they guess correctly. Carlos finds him in the laundry facility on the second day, his approach casual, but his eyes carrying urgent warning. "We got problems, Thompson. Big ones." Mike continues folding institutional bedsheets, maintaining the rhythmic motions of a man focused on simple work. But his peripheral vision catalogs every entrance, every potential threat, every shadow that might conceal immediate danger. What kind of problems? The kind where guards start asking questions about inmates who fight way above their weight class. Carlos leans against a washing machine, his voice dropping to barely audible. Officer Daniel's been making inquiries. Wants to know about your background, what kind of training you might have had before coming here. The words hit like physical blows. Mike's hands pause fractionally in their folding motion before resuming the careful pattern that defines Michael Thompson's existence. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet. But Thompson, that performance in the gym, people are talking. And not just inmates. Security footage captured enough to make smart people curious about how a janitor moves like Muhammad Ali's ghost." Mike knows the truth of it, has felt the weight of scrutiny building like atmospheric pressure before a storm. The myth of Michael Thompson worked precisely because it demanded nothing from observers, gave them no reason to look closer. Now every movement carries potential revelation. Every interaction threatens to unravel the fiction that has kept him alive in the outside world. "There's something else," Carlos continues, his voice carrying reluctant necessity. "Word is Razor's crew ain't accepting how things went down. They're saying Thompson must have had help, must be connected to something bigger than he's letting on. They're planning to test that theory." The laundry facility suddenly feels like a trap, its industrial machinery providing perfect cover for the kind of conversation that ends with blood on concrete. Mike's body language remains unchanged, but his mind races through tactical calculations, distances to exits, improvised weapons, the timing of guard rotations that might provide brief windows of opportunity. How many? 6, maybe 8. They're talking about cornering you in the showers tomorrow morning, making you explain exactly who Michael Thompson really is. Carlos pauses, studying Mike's face for reactions that don't come. Thing is, I'm starting to wonder the same thing. The admission hangs between them like a loaded weapon. Mike recognizes the moment for what it represents, the point where even allies become potential threats, where the circle of trust narrows to nothing and survival depends on decisions that will define everything that follows. You think I'm not who I say I am? I think you're exactly who you say you are, Carlos replies carefully. But I also think you're something else entirely. And that something else just painted a target on both our backs that we might not survive. Mike sets down the folded sheet, his movements deliberate and final. The simple gesture carries weight that transforms the conversation from speculation to acknowledgement. Michael Thompson, the ghost who walked these corridors in blessed anonymity, has died in a gymnasium surrounded by witnesses who refuse to accept comfortable lies. What do you want from me, Carlos? Truth. Because whatever protection you're running from out there, whatever heat made you disappear into this place, it's found you anyway. And when it comes calling, I need to know if the man standing next to me is going to fight like a janitor, or like whoever the hell you really are. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting harsh shadows that make everything appear simultaneously overexposed and hidden. Mike feels the last threads of his constructed identity fraying, worn thin by the simple necessity of not allowing himself to be beaten to death by institutional politics. Every careful month of building Michael Thompson's credibility dissolves under the weight of one moment's authentic response. The truth gets people killed, Mike says finally. Lies already did that, Carlos responds. Question is whether we're going to die as ghosts or as men. Outside the laundry facility, footsteps echo in the corridor, multiple sets moving with purposeful coordination. Mike recognizes the pattern, the way predators coordinate their approach to ensure no escape routes remain available. His body tenses automatically, 40 years of professional paranoia screaming warnings that Michael Thompson has neither the skills nor the authority to address. Carlos hears it too, his posture shifting to mirror Mike's sudden alertness. They're early. The door to the laundry facility opens with a mechanical click that sounds like a coffin closing. 6 inmates enter with the casual confidence of men who believe they hold all the advantages, their faces carrying the hard satisfaction of predators who have finally cornered elusive prey. In the space between heartbeats, Mike Tyson prepares to kill Michael Thompson forever.